My name is Kishore. I'm a software engineer at Oyo, and you can follow me on my LinkedIn at handle pkishore. And today I would like to talk about a better approach to create and validate forms. So basically, I'm a full stack engineer. So my job basically involves creating forms in the front end, validating the data, and sending it to the back end, and again validating in the back end and making sure that data I have got is not malformed and such. So with that, I want to make a bold statement saying that creating forms is hard because there are a lot of things that one need to focus on. At least rather than saying forms, creating forms is hard, maybe I can rephrase the statement saying creating forms the right way is hard. The reason it's very hard is because when you create a form, we need to focus on UI, where we have to place all the elements with whatever data requirements we've got. We need to render them based on the type of data that we are expecting from a user. After that, we need to add validations so that we are going to give an immediate feedback to the user saying that whatever value he has given is wrong, so please correct the correct the input, and then we guide the user basically. So above all, user experience matters the most. Yeah, user experience. So what a user experience is, from the journey that a user starts when he starts filling the form till the end that he submits a form, the entire user journey should be like seamless. That is what user experience makes sure. And to create all these three things in the right way is really hard. We need to make sure that UI is properly aligned and validations are properly in place, and we also make sure that the form is not very imperformant, and it is usable in the first place. And here, for UI and validations, if we speak about UI and validations in particular, we have a lot of libraries. Within React world, we have this Redux forms, forming, React forms, and there are a lot of libraries basically when it comes to UI. And equally, we also have a lot of libraries for validations as well. JSON schema is the industry standard whenever it comes to validating a JSON object. And Joy, Yup, and Validate.js are another such kind of libraries that facilitate validations. Now, this all this is all about front end, right? Like in front end, we have UI and validations, where we create UI to take input and validations to guide the user in a proper direction. Now, the story is the same with backend as well. We don't have UI in the backend, but still we need validations. The reason we need validations in the backend is simple. If at all a user tampers the data that is being transferred from front end to back end, we need to make sure that it is not tampered, and whatever signature, like whatever our data should adhere to, the rules that it adhere to should be validated in the back end as well. And at the same time, validations at the front end is utmost importance for user experience perspective. So whenever a user enters some value, we need to give him a real-time feedback saying if it is right or not, and give him suggestions saying, okay, do this or that, in so that he can make the form a valid state. So if you can see, there are two different things like UI and validations. And these validations are being performed in both front end and back end. Of course, backend is not always the requirement, but most of the time, yes. Whenever we taking data from the front end, then most of the cases it will end up being in the backend. So yes, whenever it comes to validations, we are focusing on two different places. Even though there are a lot of things that we are focusing on, like UI, validations, user experience, flow logic, and there are a lot of things that we are focusing on. They are inherently very much tightly coupled. So we have these data requirements which are coupled with user interface, and we also have these validations which are tightly coupled with UI. Now, my the way I look at it is, what if we have a solution that abstracts off this UI and validations into one single unified schema, something that Rather than separating out validations, UI, and everything, what if we have one single unified format? And that is what FlowJV is. FlowJV is the library created just to make sure that UI and validations, it only focuses on data requirements. You give data requirements, and it will take care of the rest. Like, it takes care of data validation, it takes care of form, UI, and stuff. So the way it works is simple. But then, because FlowJV encapsulates everything, we have this great saying, right? Anything that does everything is not good. And obviously, FlowJV is not something that does everything for us. FlowJV is just a library. At its core, it's just a data validation library. All it does is, given some data requirements, it validates the data against those requirements and returns us if the data is valid or not, and bunch of errors if it is not valid. So in a comprehensive way, data requirements, given some data requirements into FlowJV gives us utilities so that we can validate the data requirements against some data, or we can in fact create a form out of the data given. Okay, it provides some utilities. In fact, you can do whatever you want to with these data requirements, and that is how FlowJV is developed in the first place. So let us have the small demo where I'll demonstrate you how FlowJV works. Like, given some data requirements, creating a form out of it. Talking about this in thin air doesn't make sense, right? So let us have this small demo where what it does is creates a registration form for us like this. Okay, this is prepared using FlowJV. FlowJV has an inbuilt theming support, and it also has uh, UI bindings for React basically. Okay, so if you can see name, age is of type number, and it should be of 1 to 100. Gender is a radio group, and we've got an email which says if it is valid email or not. And the moment you enter valid email ID, it, it closes off that error. And then you got this password which has this rule saying that password should be of minimum length file length. And if I say some password, and if I now confirm password should match the password, and now there is something called are you employed, and if it is employed, only then we want to collect some data. Okay, this is reasonable. uh, this has reasonable complexity, and this is something that we do in our day-to-day lives as well. So let's try to create the same form using FlowJV and see how FlowJV helps us in these kind of requirements rather than focusing on all this stuff separately. How FlowJV helps us in doing this. So before talking about that, let me talk about how FlowJV handles all of this in the first place, like bird view of how FlowJV as a package was developed. So in FlowJV, we've got 4 packages. Actually, the last two, React Custom and React Material, are like UI bindings to FlowJV. Okay, so FlowJV is the core of what we are trying to achieve. So in FlowJV, we call schema as flow schema, the schema that flows from top to bottom, one after the other. We take data requirements one after the other as it flows from top to bottom, and that's why the name FlowJV. You're going to see how why is it called when we define the schema next. So this is the core of FlowJV, and then we've got FlowJV React. So FlowJV is not just a validation library; it also provides us some utilities with which we can play with this schema, whatever the flow that we are getting, right? That can be played with this FlowJV because of utilities that it provides. It provides utilities like traversing the schema one after the other or something of that sort. And FlowJV React makes use of this flow utilities to create a React component that embeds this form within it based on the UI requirements, sorry, data requirements. And now FlowJV React is the heart, like it defines how everything should be in place. But then we've got other two things called UI bindings, where custom is like custom UI that was developed alongside with FlowJV. Let's suppose you have your own UI in your own company or in your own business requirement. Like maybe someone uses Andy, or someone uses Material, someone uses Semantic UI or Bootstrap, doesn't matter what. FlowJV provides us a very nice utilities where you can hook this UI into your uh, I mean your custom UI into this FlowJV React platform. So with the demo, what I'm going to do is we are going to use these three packages. So basically, it's like peer dependencies. FlowJV is the core, and FlowJV React depends on this FlowJV. So FlowJV React has this peer dependency of FlowJV. In the same way, FlowJV React custom is just a configuration created, which has this peer dependency of FlowJV React. So with that said, let me just start the demo. Okay. So I have created this boilerplate for this demo purpose, where I have this registration form title and then submit button. We shall take a look into this component in this React component later. So this is the schema that we define. Okay. So this is the minimal flow schema. As I've said, in FlowJV, schema is called flow schema. And the reason it is called is the properties is an array. If you can see, the schema we define is from top to down approach, like one after the other. We describe it one after the other. I use TypeScript, and if you're not comfortable with TypeScript, you can just remove this off, which is fine. But because I use TypeScript, I just make use of type checking whenever I define my schema. So FlowJV provides this type called iFlow schema. When you provide this, you can start defining your schema like that. Now, we are trying to create a registration form, and the requirements is simple. We want to have name, age, gender, email ID, password, confirm password, and years of experience, and if the user is employed or not. And to take those requirements, we are going to declaratively say that the data I'm expecting is an object, and the property that I want to take are like name, and which is of type string. In the same way, I got age, gender, email, password, confirm password, is employed, and then years of experience. Okay. So with this defined, and once I save this, I get this registration form ready. But now there's a problem here. I couldn't differentiate between different fields, right? So these are just data requirements that I have given. As I've told you, like in FlowJV, the data requirements also has this UI embedded into it. It's basically a trade-off. The reason that FlowJV encourages this is, just imagine if I have UI somewhere and data requirements somewhere. Every time I need to make a change, I have to go for two different files. Rather than doing that, what FlowJV does is, all it does is, it adds a bit of more meta information about UI, which you can directly tie up with the data requirement, so that it just takes care of the rest. It just eases our life a bit more easier actually. Okay. So now, because we have defined our data requirements, everything as a string, and we've got all the key names. And now here the key is nothing but we are expecting an object out of this form. And now this object has these keys of this, which are of type this. Okay. This is very simple basically. Now, for adding UI to this, UI binding for each individual element, we've got something called label. Now, once we define labels, we've got name, age, gender. So it's just a way of saying what each key label is going to be looking like. Okay. Once these labels are defined, I can save this, and then immediately I'm going to have all these labels. Okay. So now I've got this data requirements, and also I've got this labels defined. Now, if you can see, the types are not valid, right? Like name is of type string, which is perfectly fine, but then age should be of type number. In the same way, gender should be of type enum, where it takes one of two values, two or three values. And then we've got is employed, which is of type boolean. So if we define our type, saying that if it is of type number and it is of type enum, where it takes values of male and female, and the labels I want to show for this is male and female. Okay. Now I've got this age, which is of type number, and the moment I define this, the UI element automatically changes to type number, where I can start adding values. And now because it is of type boolean, it has got changed to checkbox. Okay, and because gender is of type enum, I've got this select drop down. It's as easy as that. And now if you can see, enum could be of type select drop down, or it could be type radio group, right? So for that we have additional UI configuration to enum, saying that what type of UI that it expects. In the same way for password and confirm password, it's currently of type string. This is not desired. Password should be of type password. Even it is of input type, we expect it to be of type password. In the same way confirm password. So to do this, we have got another additional configuration where it says UI type to be radio in case of enum, and in case of password and confirm password, we've got UI type to be password. So UI type is another special configuration of UI where we add meta information about our UI. Once done, we've got this radio group. And again, password is going to become of type password. So with that defined, we've got this UI. And actually, if it is valid, I can directly submit it and get the default values of everything, which is perfectly fine. Now I need to add validations. Now to add validations, for each property, we can define validations saying that age should be between some range, or email should be a valid email ID, password should be a minimum of some 5 character, or confirm password should match the password. We can add validations by defining a key saying validations. Validations is an array where it takes logic and error. Error is just a string in case if it fails, and logic is nothing but we're going to define the logic that this validation need to adhere to. Okay, when it comes to password, we want to make sure that password should be of minimum length, 5 character length. So if you can see, when we are defining this, we are making sure that error string, whatever we want to define the error string in case validation fails, is tightly coupled within validation itself. So, and not just that, there is this special syntax. If you can see, each logic field takes 3 values. One is data. Data is nothing but the object that we are trying to validate. And then ref is nothing but the property under validation. When it comes to email, I'm just validating email. So I do not need to say that I am validating against data.ref. Rather than saying that, I can directly say data.email. Rather than asking for data.email, I can directly refer to the parent property as ref. And now moment I define this email ID and then test this ref against it, I'm going to get if it is valid or not. And if it is not valid, we are going to show this error message saying that email should be a valid email ID. Okay, so now with this defined, we can start having these errors popping up. So because this is not valid email ID, because this it's failing to have this regular expression, it's failing. Now, if I make it a valid email ID saying @gmail.com, it will just work fine. And then again, password should be of minimum character file length, because for password we've said that reference, which is nothing but property under validation, password length should be greater than or equal to 5. In which case, if it fails, I need to show this error message: password length should be minimum 5 character length. Now, validations is an array. That means you can define your own logic as an array of things, and each error is going to have its own custom message. And all the list of errors that our validation is failing are going to be shown beside this. And then for confirm password, we are saying that data.password is equal to confirm password. This is what our logic is. If it fails, then we show an error message saying confirm password should match password. So now with this defined, because password is empty and confirm password is also empty, it's showing as valid. Now let me just valid@gmail.com, and for password I'll put it as hello, and then confirm password, it should be like hello. And the moment I change password, everything gets re-rendered if at all there is any failure. Okay, the entire form re-renders saying what are all fields that depends on it. Based on that, it will just show error messages or something of that sort. Now with our UI defined, with our data validations defined, everything defined, there is one last thing that we need to do, and that is this flow logic. So what is flow logic? It's simple. Like we are having this field saying if the user is employed or not. If a user is employed, only then I want to collect this information of years of experience. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. If that is what our data requirement is, I want to collect this information only if user is employed. Otherwise, I just want to hide this entire field. So this could go with any amount of complexity basically. So to do that, we have something called flow logic within FlowJV, where we say that we are having a special type of property, which is of type if condition, where I define this condition saying that if data is employed, and if it is true, and I mean, if the condition is true, then render this list of components. I mean, render this list of data requirements. And in case if it is false, we can say that render another list of components if it is false. Now that we have defined an if condition saying that this is the condition, and if it is true, show this data requirements. Now if I say is employed to be false or true, accordingly we're going to have this changed accordingly. Now we've got this theme and then error, and then if I just reload this, I don't have this thing. I mean, submit button is not like active. The reason is it is invalid. Now, if I define my details, like I'm a demo person with age of 30, and I have an age of, let's suppose, female, and then demo@gmail.com, and then I have got password of hello and then hello, and let's suppose I'm not employed. Now, once I submit this, I get this alert box, which defines whatever data that was entered in the form. And otherwise, if I'm employed, I can say it as yes, and I can tell my experience as this. So if you want to see how we've bootstrapped uh, this component, it's very simple basically. We've got FlowJV React, which gives us a function saying setup FlowJV. And now we are trying to set up FlowJV with the configuration that is inbuilt with the FlowJV React, which is nothing but FlowJV React custom. So rather than defining our config for our UI, it is directly defined using this custom package. Okay, so if you can also define your own configuration based on your own business requirements, like with material or anything. In fact, FlowJV React also provides UI binding with material. So if you have got Ant-D or anything literally, you can define it so easily. It's not even heavy lifting basically. All you tell is if it is of type text, then you need to show this, and if it is of UI type password, you need to display this, and if there are errors, this is how you need to show it. So it's like very declarative in nature, and you can always define your configuration if you want. But for this demo purpose, I've used this custom configuration for this nice UI, and most of the time I am okay with this uh, default one, because I can just directly bootstrap my application, right? And FlowJV React Custom also provides something called uh, a CSS file. Okay, only if I allow this, only then I can have this nice UI. So we need to make sure that if we are using custom UI provided by FlowJV, you need to also import this CSS file. Now here in FlowJV form is the component that I'm creating by setting up FlowJV with the configuration defined in FlowJV custom. And then here I am saying that FlowJV form where the schema is the schema we have defined so far. And on submit, if the data we have entered is valid, then alert it. On change, we are just setting value. So basically FlowJV form is a control component. So where you say value is this and whether it is valid or not. And after that we define value and on change. We've got class name, which is FJV form and then theme. So here for custom form, I mean configuration that FlowJV provides, you need to say it as FJV form. And whenever I change theme, I toggle it between dark and light, which will be provided as a class name. And on submit, so basically I'm prepending and appending data, and I'm prepending this header, which is nothing but a flex. I mean, registration form and theme. And for footer, I'm just displaying this input button. Whatever logic in the between, if you can see, is nothing but is taken care by FlowJV. So this is all about FlowJV. So if you can see, it's also very much uh, small in size. Like minified version itself is 21 KB for FlowJV, and for React binding for FlowJV, it takes care of that FlowJV and uses the utilities provided by FlowJV and creates this nice custom component stuff, which is like 30.4. And we've got this custom binding, which is like just 10.9 KB, and gzipped it's just 2.7 KB. So overall, you're going to have it below like 40 KB, I guess, 40 or 50 KB. And when gzipped, it will be even more less. And in fact, there is a lot of scope for us to decrease this bundle size even more further. And not just that, FlowJV is also capable of having custom UI basically. You can customize. So whatever we have defined in FlowJV is heavily inspired from this article, Crazy Engineering, where it says that form should be of one column layout. If you have multiple columns, right, it is not a good user experience in terms of user experience. And not just that, this can be like mobile friendly by default. You don't need to create a separate UI or separate kind of rules when it comes to mobile. It's like both compatible with desktop and mobile when you define it as a single row. And that is what FlowJV basically encourages basically. And with this, it's all about flow. And what if you have custom requirements? You can also do that by saying that I want to have a render map. Like let's suppose with the data requirements we've got, right? Let's suppose I want to have this age field displayed completely different. In which case I'm going to say that I want to have this age field of whatever JSON I have been defining in my data requirements, such that it will be displayed like this. Okay, age field is going to take address, success, okay, address, success, and then I've got value, and then on change. And now I can say that age field, I want to return it as an input field, which is of type, let's suppose number, just like this. And value is just nothing but value. And on change is nothing but on change of e dot target dot value. Whenever the value changes, I want to just have this. And when I define this way, render map, okay, cannot invoke an object which is possibly undefined. So I need to have it as question mark dot. Now, if you can see, I've got this name field as demo and age field, which is like custom prepared 30. And now if I say 1, 2, or 3, or I can do whatever I want to. Now I can make a separate label in the front like this. I can wrap this whole thing in a label and then a division here saying this is of type age. And then I can say style equals margin top to be of 10, let's suppose, which is just the same. Now I've got this all these elements, and not just that, FlowJV also provides configuration for custom. What if you have some data type which is not defined? Okay, in which case you can create, like let's suppose there is something like date picker or something of that sort. You can create a custom data type or as well. So look into documentation and you will find a lot of things about FlowJV. It is under active development, and there are still a lot of things that we need to figure out still. Like it's not even 1.0 still, but there is a lot of scope here. So like we need to define arrays, a data type for arrays, and then date validations, and then most importantly custom UI development. So those are the three focus areas that we are focusing on. And then performance, which will be done soon. There's a roadmap for this, and you can take a look into this project even more further at github.com/flowjv. And then you can look into the documentation as well in this website. Yeah, thank you so much. This is it. Any question?